Chapter 13. It was late in May. I believe Timothy decided that he might stay here forever. We had not seen a schooner, a sail, or heard any airplane since setting foot on this island. I know it was late May because each day I dropped a small pebble in an old can that we had found on the beach. It was our only way to tell how many days we'd been there. Every so often I'd count them, beginning on April 9th. That is the 40 pebbles in the can. On this day, Timothy thoughtfully said, "Philippe, has it ever come to your own self that I might be poorly again some morning?" I knew he was thinking about the malar and the fever. I said it had. He said, "Well, you mustn't then know how to provide for your own self with the fish." For more than a week, I knew he'd been laboring over nails and turning them into fish hooks. He always speared the fish in the langasta with a sharp stick, but I couldn't see, so of course I couldn't do that. I knew he was making the hooks just for me. He said with a secret tone in his voice, "I have found an outrageous good old hole on the reef, and it's a safe place for you." He went down to the hill and started out along the reef shelf. By now my feet were rough and tough, and I hardly felt any of the jagged edges of the coral, but I knew that lurking in the tide pools were the treacherous sea urchins. Stepping on one of those invited a sharp spine in your foot, and Timothy had already warned me of that. "They very poisonous, they be giving you a terrible pain." Every 2 feet, Timothy had driven a piece of driftwood into the deep coral crevices so that I could feel them as I went along. Neither of us knew what to do about the sea urchins, but Timothy said he'd have to think about that mightily about them. And he had taken a large rock and smashed them all along the path on the top, but in time they would come back. We went out to about 50 feet along the reef, and he said, "There, now we fish." He described the hole to me. It was about 20 feet in diameter and about 6 feet deep. The bottom was sandy, mostly free of coral, so that my hook would not snag. He said that this was the most natural opening in the sea, so that the fish could swim up and out of the coral and catch on the walled pool and catch my hook. He took my hand and had me feel all around the edges of the hole. The coral had been smoothed over by centuries of sea wash. Timothy said that the sand in the water acted like grindstone on the sharp edges of the coral. It was not completely smooth, but there were no jagged edges sticking out. "Now reach down here," Timothy said, "and tug off the mussel." So I put my hand down in the warm water, kneeling down over the ledge, and I felt for the mussel. But in ripping it loose, I lost my balance, only for Timothy's hand to prevent me from falling in. If you are blind, the sensation of falling can be terrifying. My memory of the fall off the raft was still very clear. Timothy said, "Ooh, easy there, Philippe. Sit up a moment and just relax." His voice was soothing. "If you ever do fall in, just stay in the hole for a while, feel which way the water washes, then follow it to the ledge and grab a hold, and pull your own self out." Timothy guided my hands in the opening, the tough mussel shell, and digging out the slippery meat out of the bait for the bait to hook. "'Tis an outrageously sharp knife. Be very careful of your fingers." Then he told me to feel the hook and slip the mussel in over the barb. I fished many times with my father, and this was easy. Rusty bolts served as sinkers. Timothy had found several pieces of wood with bolts on them that he burned, and then he raked out the bolts of the ashes. He unraveled the lifeline from the raft to make a single strand for the fishing line. I dropped the hook and the sinker overboard. In a moment there was a sharp tug, and I jerked, flipping the fish back over my shoulder so it wouldn't land on the reef. Timothy cheered and told me to feel along the line of the wiggling fish, and then I took the hook out. Squirming and jumping in my hand was a small but fat fish. I grinned over to Timothy. When I had fished before, it was fun. Now I felt like I had done something very special. I was learning to do things all over again by touch and feel. I said to Timothy, "Dis outrageous humbug good old fish." He laughed with pleasure. Every day, that is what I did. I did the fishing from then on. Timothy, of course, I could tell, was watching over me. He continued to get the langosta. He had to dive for those. But I caught all the rest of the fish. After the third morning, he let me go alone on the reef. I'd feel my way along the driftwoods and stop and then find the hole and pry the mussel loose, and then I'd fish. I was alone on the reef, but somehow I always knew that he was sitting in the beach nearby. I could sense his presence. Yet he was always back at the hut when I got there. We often talked about the K and what was on it. Timothy had not thought much about it. He took it for granted that the K had always been there. But I told him about geography and how maybe a volcano could have caused the devil's mouth. Then he listened with fascination, and he was almost speechless. We talked about the little coral animals and how they might have been building a foundation of the K for thousands of years. I said, then the sand just began to gather on it, and many years it finally became an island. It was as if a whole new world had opened up to Timothy. He kept listening and saying, "Oh, that be true, young boss?" I found out that he'd never thought about how the sea grape or the vines or the coconuts came to be on this old K, and I told him I knew. Seeds had drifted from the sea, or birds had dropped them, and after rain, they'd taken root. "What about the lizard?" he asked earnestly. "I bet a bird flying over from another island holding a mother lizard in its beak dropped it here. Then the baby lizards were born. Or maybe a mother lizard washed ashore on driftwood from a storm." Timothy was very impressed, and I felt good I'd been able to teach him something. We found out a lot to talk about. I think it was the 5th afternoon of the week. Then I blurted out, "Timothy, I'm going to climb the palm now." "Eh, Philippe?" he said. I could almost see his grin on his face and the light in his eyes as he looked skyward greedily, I'm sure. He said, "Oh, that is one coconut tree over there. It is way in its back and over the old horse. That be the one to climb for sure." I was trembling a little bit as he had led me to the tree till I could tell him I could go just a short way, climb it like a monkey. If I could do it, then I was to come back down, put the knife between my teeth, and go back up again. The trunk of the tree of the palm must have been about 2 feet in diameter, because I could easily put my hands all the way around the back. I grasped it, hunched my body, and placed my bare feet on the rough trunk, and I began to climb. Timothy was probably holding his breath. I went up about 10 feet, and I froze. I could not move up or down. My legs started to wiggle and go rigid. Timothy, standing there to catch me if I fell, called out softly, "Philippe, 'tis no shame to ease your own self down. Come back down here on the sand." Slowly I began to back down out of the trunk. The bark was rough against my hands and my feet, but what I felt mostly was Timothy's disappointment. I couldn't have been more than a few feet off the ground when I took a deep breath and said to myself, "If you fall, you'll fall in the sand." Then I started climbing again. Timothy called up, "Oh, you forgot the knife!" I knew that if it stopped now, I'd never climb it. I didn't answer him, but I kept my hands and my feet now steadily. Then I heard him shout, "You be getting to the top!" Palm fronds brushed my head. I grasped the base of one to pull myself up. Timothy let out a roar of joy. Then he told me how to reach the coconuts. It took a long time to pull and tug and twist them, but they finally fell. I stayed in the palm for another few minutes to rest. Then I slid down. I had won. My feet touched the ground, and Timothy hugged me, yelling, "Ha! That palm harasses no more, young boss." We drank every drop of coconut milk, and we feasted on the fresh coconut meat. Squatting near me, his teeth crunching on the coconut, Timothy said, You see, Philippe, you do not need the eye now. You have done without the eye what I could not do with my whole body. I was almost as if I graduated from survival course that Timothy had been putting me through all these months since we landed on the Cay. It rained that night, a very soft rain, not even enough to drip through the palm fronds. Timothy breathed softly beside me. I said now that I was with him every moment of the day and the night for 2 months, but I had not seen him. I remembered that ugly, welted face, but now, in my memory, it didn't seem so ugly at all. It seemed kind and strong. I asked, Timothy, are you still black? He laughed and laughed, and his laughter filled the hut.